Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grid Live Pre-Race Special Sunday Edition. We have a lot to talk about with NASCAR All-Star Race, Indy 500 qualifying drama, Repco Supercars Series Grid ranking, much more. Joe Samaniego here along with Ben Schneider and Kobe Lambeth from the Podium Finish. A big thank you to our Patreon subscribers calling the show, Mark Robin, for helping us stay on the air. They invest in the Grid Network each and every month. Link in the video description to our Patreon, or buy me a coffee. You could do a one-time contribution or multiple cups of coffee, as some of our fine folks have done so. We'll read your name on the air as we see you have bought a cup of coffee. Ben, very exciting weekend we have here, starting with NASCAR, the Cup Series at North Wilkesboro Speedway. For the first time since 1996, they're hosting the All-Star Race, becoming the fifth track to do so. We know this track was dropped off of the season because smaller crowd, because of the capacity, much more rural location, and then of course NASCAR was booming back in the 90s. Now, one of the big things, SMI, which owns New Hampshire Motor Speedway, and Texas Motor Speedway, which took both of their dates, they're all now under the same ownership. SMI essentially gave the All-Star Race from Texas to North Wilkesboro. 27 years of fans also crying that they want this track to come back, including early on to Save the Speedway. Back in 1996, I was so hopeful to see this track come back, and now, so weird to say it's coming back and even having the North Wilkesboro Speedway logo. And so much has changed, including now 92% of Americans have internet. Then, after the last race, there was no social media to talk about should Wilkesboro come back. How special is this been to see this track that was left for dead come back and host the All-Star Race, which many felt was sort of done with after last year's?
Well, Joe, I said this much on Grid Tonight when this was first announced. This is an absolutely unbelievable day for NASCAR. The announcement was an unbelievable day, and this right here tonight is going to be an unbelievable day. Yesterday was an unbelievable day. It's just absolutely incredible that this is where we are right now. I think people really need to understand this doesn't happen. This does not happen in the world of sports. I can speak to my fellow Philly sports fans out there. Like, Veterans Stadium is gone. The Spectrum is gone in the city of Philadelphia. Like, a lot of times when sporting arenas and coliseums or whatever you want to call it, stadiums, when those teams move on or when the sport moves on, the stadium gets torn down. There's no crying to bring it back because you'd have to completely rebuild it from the ground up. Wilkesboro was just kind of abandoned, and they tried to bring it back in 2010, 2011 and host some late model races there. Those only lasted a couple of years, but this effort seems to be much more with the long-term future in mind. Bringing NASCAR back this quickly is just absolutely unbelievable how fast it's come together. And this is such a special weekend. I know everybody at the track is just absolutely thrilled to be there. Everybody within the sport is thrilled this is going on. People are saying that this is NASCAR's version of Field of Dreams, and I think that's an absolutely fair analogy. I don't know, maybe running Daytona on the beach again is the only thing that you could get closer to a Field of Dreams kind of thing for NASCAR. But this is just incredible, and I think Joe, if you could bring up that graphic again, just talking about where we were in 1996. It's been almost 10,000 days, and you see all the different things that have happened, how long it's been. I wasn't even born until 1999, so this is the first time I'm seeing NASCAR race here at this track. 15 new Cup champions, 8 new tracks on the schedule, 4 different U.S. presidents. The Red Sox and the Cubs broke their long World Series droughts in this time. We've had 2 popes selected in the Catholic Church. Tiger Woods had just gone pro. As you mentioned, Joe, only 7% of Americans had access to internet. Now I think it's the opposite. Only 7% don't have access to internet. And of course, the CART IRL split was going on at that time as well. That just speaks to how long it's been. And like I said, this doesn't happen. What other sport are you going to see something that's been dead and gone for 27 years on this stage come back in this way? It's just absolutely incredible. And I hope that NASCAR puts on a good show tonight, and I hope the fans have a great time, and I hope they continue to come back. I hope this isn't just a one-time thing where people are hyped and excited for the return, but then it starts to wear off. I think if people are serious about saving the Speedway, if you're in the Wilkes County area, if you're in North Carolina, you got to continue to come out and support your local track. This is absolutely no exception. And this is going to be the test, I think, for a lot of people who are fighting to save their local short tracks. You have an opportunity now to prove that you're serious when you say, bring this track back, and I will be there. I will support it. I will 100% make sure that what happened to it or what was about to happen to it doesn't happen again. This is that test now. So everybody in North Carolina, go out to the track, have a great time, and hopefully we'll keep this venue on the schedule for years to come.
Great point you brought up, especially Larry McReynolds. Earlier this week, he said, hopefully this is not a Rockingham where Rockingham came back for the Truck Series, dropped off. We still see fans out there bring back Rockingham. I think that's another discussion for another time. Everything you said, especially all the changes and everything we've seen since the last race in North Wilkesboro, one of the big things I feel there's so much symbolism too as well. 1996, North Wilkesboro's last race. They were part of the first season of NASCAR along with Martinsville. I was hopeful it'll come back in 1998 during the 50th season. Just add one more race, one last race at North Wilkesboro. That didn't happen. Save the Speedway, 2005, just get internet. See if this can make the change. That didn't happen. It just seems so many things didn't happen. And then finally, once the right people, especially Terry Parsons, Benny's widow, we had Dale Earnhardt Jr., and then Marcus Smith, SMI, because we know Bridget Smith was really adamant. He closed Wilkesboro, Vortex Moore Speedway. Marcus Smith, different story. And now, first time we're going to have the All-Star Race there, and that is the main point of business today. The All-Star Race, 200 laps with a caution near halfway, and there's only 3 sets of tires because we anticipate if it's dry conditions, you're going to chew up those tires. We know almost everyone's going to take tires in the halfway stop, one before, one after. Depending on when the cautions fall, that's where the crew chiefs are really going to be trying to figure out a strategy plan. However, we saw yesterday, Ben, wet tire conditions because of the damp weather, so that could also be a factor as well too. The drivers saying they felt they got a lot of grip. Some they even saying they felt they have more grip on the wet tires than they did with the slick tires. Over 27 years though, since we last raced at North Wilkesboro, this track with the 2 lanes, many have said long green flag runs, side by side racing. But we've been seeing a little bit different than that, especially with the Truck Series, where you could be side by side, but it was still that bottom lane was the preferred lane. Do you anticipate seeing plenty of different strategies between the teams and when the caution falls?
Well, Joe, first of all, wasn't that wild yesterday? I mean, if you had told somebody 3 years ago that we're going to be having the All-Star Race in North Wilkesboro and they're going to be running a heat race on wet weather tires at that track, I mean, I think somebody would have looked at you like you were absolutely insane. But here we are, and that was truly a sight to see yesterday. And kind of wild to see how fast those wet weather tires were. I mean, it seemed like, I think Daniel Suarez was even saying that there was more grip on those tires than there were on the slicks. So, an interesting sort of situation for Goodyear to find themselves in, I guess. But I think, the tire situation, obviously this surface is very, very old. It's been, heavily repaired, obviously, given the state of the track it was in for so many years. So it's certainly a bit of an unknown for these teams. Of course, they ran the heat races yesterday, and, other teams will run the Open today and, get some laps under their tires before the main event. But I think that, you're seeing a very interesting sort of situation here with this next gen car compared to what you saw in the truck race yesterday. So it's still a little early for me to tell. Obviously, when you have the heat races, there's only, a handful of cars out on track. I think once we get the full all-star field out there, we might see a slight different sort of style of racing as well. And obviously the longer race as well with, whatever it's going to be 200 laps, I think. So, it's going to be interesting. I think it's certainly an unknown for these teams, but the teams that historically have been good at dealing with the unknowns and figuring things out as they go along, I think those are the teams you're going to have to look out for today.
The teams you have to look out for, I think, are going to be the ones that have had some history here. Particularly, I'm looking at Hendricks. I'm looking at RCR. Roush Racing is going to be really interesting to see because Chris Buescher looked really strong. Some of the newer teams that don't have the data here, I think they're really going to be playing more by ear of how the race unfolds, how all the action unfolds. It's going to be really interesting to see if that the trend that we've seen all year long so far, stage 1, stage 2, very little caution, is that third and final stage. I'm curious if anybody's going to try to just save their tires, take it really easy so they don't use any tires until that first pit stop under the potential halfway point caution. If they could save 2 tires, because we might have multiple overtimes, we could have longer runs in that second half of the race. I think it's going to be really interesting to see if someone is going to get to that point where they could try to save the tires that far out. It's a tall task, but it's something we'll be watching for. Comment in the chat room. North Wilkesboro NASCAR, amazing, playing cool. Very excited to see Wilkesboro back in the schedule again. And of course, Daniel Suarez, he'll be leading everyone. First time I'm pretty sure a Mexican-born driver is going to be leading the field to the green flag at North Wilkesboro. Alongside him, Chris Buescher. Brad Keselowski said Chris Buescher has a very fast car, and he dominated that heat race. Suarez, he had to get around Chase Elliott to get that heat race win, to keep his pole position in a race that saw wet then drying conditions. Do you see either one of them taking the All-Star Race win?
So either RFK car or Daniel Suarez?
Sure. Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, I was very impressed with RFK in the heat races. I think they showed a lot of speed, but obviously, Daniel Suarez as well. I think track position is going to be, a little more important with these next gen cars, the heat races or anything to go off of. I saw a lot of people, saying as much yesterday on social media, and I don't know if the weather and the wet weather tires had anything to do with it as well, but I think some people were frustrated that it seemed like there wasn't, as much passing, or it was much more difficult to pass in these next gen cars when we saw a truck race yesterday as well. So I think if Suarez can stay up there, and get good restarts whenever he needs to, and kind of drive away from there, I think he's going to be in very good shape. So I could definitely see him taking the win tonight, as well as Chris Buescher's there on the front row, or Brad Keselowski as well, not starting too far back there in the 8th position. So again, it's very hard to predict because it's something that we haven't dealt with in 27 years here, and certainly not in these kinds of conditions either. So going to be very interesting to watch, but absolutely those guys, they all have a shot taking the win tonight.
The win tonight will be really huge for either one of those drivers, especially Chris Buescher. Won at Bristol last year in the night race. He got in looking very strong. Of course, he was one of the drivers that did the Goodyear tire test. Tyler Reddick, Austin Dillon were the other two for their respective manufacturer, Toyota and Chevrolet. And one of the big things, they added notes from that tire test. Yesterday, as you mentioned, Ben, in that race, in the heat races, they got to test out how the track races. Granted, different conditions, should be dry conditions today. Today, we're going to have also the All-Star Race Open. Those drivers trying to get into the All-Star Race, they did not race yesterday. Nothing. So they don't have any of those notes the All-Star teams do. We know it is very hard to win from that transfer spot. Do you feel it's a bigger gap now compared to other tracks like Texas where you're trying to get into the All-Star Race and win? Or is that disadvantage smaller since we are in a short track where aerodynamics, horsepower compared to Texas or Charlotte may not be an issue?
Well, I think it depends on who the fan vote winner is, or who is transferring from the Open here. If it's somebody driving for a top team that's in a fast car that just happened to not win a race last year and they had to go through the Open, or happened to not win a race last year and they have to go in through the fan vote, then I think absolutely they could drive their way up to the field. If the fan vote winner goes to, again, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus here, but there was a year where Josh Wise won the fan vote with Phil Parsons' Cup Series team at 98 car. It was kind of like one of the first major internet Reddit sort of, crowdfunding, not funding, I guess, because crowd voting, I guess you could say, sort of situations to get him into the All-Star race. I think he was just happy to be there. He wasn't, expecting that he was going to win the race or anything. But when the fan vote winner is somebody like a Casey Kane, who had shown speed the year, but he ended up going on to win the All-Star race from getting into the fan vote, it's certainly very much possible. So we'll see what the results are tonight. But I think, like I just said in the previous couple of segments here, I think track position is certainly going to be very important. So we'll see if there's an opportunity for some teams to try to throw some strategy into the mix there as well. I think you're certainly going to see some teams starting towards the back, already starting to think about that, because I think they realize that it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to drive up all the way through the field and be able to win the race that way. I think a lot of them are going to have to figure out some sort of tire strategy or pit stop strategy to leapfrog the field and go on track position from there. So it's going to be interesting to watch.
It's going to be very interesting just seeing some of the drivers. Ryan Preece, we know he's good in the short tracks. If he could get in the top two, I would not be surprised if he tries to do a strategy where he just saves so much tires for the end of the All-Star race. Harrison Burton, I feel he could be with that momentum from Darlington, get up there, battle for the lead, potentially transfer in. And Michael McDowell, past Daytona 500 winner in this race, if he could get in, I think he's going to be turning heads as well too. And then of course the fan vote is going to be very interesting to see who gets in. We know Noah Gragson has been sort of campaigning for that fan vote. I think his comments about how he was not exactly excited to be at Wilkesboro probably isn't going to help him get votes, but it's going to be very interesting to see how it all turns out. Michael Waltrip, first driver to win the race from the transfer to the All-Star race. And then Casey Kane in 2008, first driver to transfer from the fan vote and win the All-Star race. Very exciting 2008 year. North Wilkesboro, as I mentioned, is the fifth track to host the All-Star race and very unique because it joins Charlotte, Atlanta, Bristol, and Texas. All of them SMI tracks. This event has not been on any other track that was independently owned or owned by NASCAR ISC back then. And after last year, Texas Motor Speedway, it mainly felt the All-Star race was sort of done for, calling for it to be removed from the season. That wasn't needed because it brought just a lot of negative energy and discussion after the controversial finish and the lack of racing. Now, depending on what happens today, should North Wilkesboro be considered to host the All-Star race next year or even a points paying race?
Well, when you put it into context of the All-Star race, I think it complicates the question. If you're just talking about North Wilkesboro, if this weekend goes well, and if we realize that this track, is in a position where it can host a full Cup Series field and a full Cup Series points-paying weekend and run a full race distance and all that, then I think absolutely that shouldn't be off the table. And I think that would bring this racetrack revival full circle. It's not just a Cup exhibition race. It's the Cup Series having a points-paying race back on this track that was abandoned and left for dead. It would really bring it full circle and just make it even more unbelievable of a comeback than it's already been here. My only worry is that if you do that, what happens to the All-Star race? Does the All-Star race go back to being a sort of situation where nobody really cares about it, or it's not nearly as special as it once was? Does it go back to being a race where we rotate it from track to track every year and it kind of loses its luster and doesn't have much of an identity? Do we keep it at North Wilkesboro? Do we have a situation where it's like it was at Charlotte back in the day, where we have the All-Star race and then North Wilkesboro's points-paying race for next weekend? How does that fit into this time of year with the Coke 600 and everything also being in North Carolina? I think there's a lot to consider there as it pertains to the All-Star race. But as for North Wilkesboro specifically, absolutely, I think a points-paying race shouldn't be off the table. Now, the question then is which track loses its date. I would like to see a track that has 2 dates on the schedule lose its date so that we don't take a track off of the schedule entirely at North Wilkesboro's expense here. But I think, given how much hype has been surrounding this weekend and how much excitement has been surrounding this weekend, if they can find a way to bring a points-paying race to North Wilkesboro Speedway and do it right, I would be all for it.
Points paying race at North Wilkesboro, I think will be something a lot of people, like I say, will be excited coming around full circle. One of the big things I feel with the All-Star race, if this works out, I would be in favor of, okay, next year, same thing. Try to work a little bit better on what needs to be done for North Wilkesboro before it becomes a points paying race in 2025. This is the first year. Can't hurt to have a second year. And I think that second year is a test because quite often the first year, that's a honeymoon period. Everyone's excited about it. That second year, will the fans return back? That would be a good indicator. So I think the All-Star race should be considered a potential to return here next year. Of course, the race is going to dictate that. And just, I think, the response we're going to get from the fans, too. If we see that demand, if Marcus Smith feels comfortable that hey, this facility, we could do the points race. We can make it work. That'd be great. I think it will be only a one race deal, not two races like it did prior to his removal in 1996. It's going to be a very exciting time, I think, for the All-Star race this weekend. People talking about, is this bringing back the same excitement as before? It'll be really interesting to see what happens with North Wilkesboro Speedway and the All-Star race later today. Now, before we get into the Repco Supercar Series, we're going to bring back Kobe Lambeth for Indy 500 qualifying update because we're going to be deciding who goes onto the pole. Well, not us, but the IndyCar Series at Indianapolis will be deciding who goes to the front row, the pole, and who goes home. Starting with who's going home, there is a very high chance it's going to be a Rahal Letterman Lanigan car. They brought 4 cars, 3 for their full-time drivers and Catherine Legg. She is in the race in 30th, so she just barely missed being in this back row shootout. Jack Harvey, Christian Lundgaard, and Graham Rahal, they're all in trouble. The only non-Rahal Letterman Lanigan car, Stingray Rob, with Rick Ware Racing Dale Coyne. Last week, after the Indianapolis Grand Prix GMR Grand Prix, Christian Lundgaard got the pole, was running up front. We had mentioned if he was to get a podium, that would be a good day. Didn't get a podium, 4th place, and he said it felt like a win for the team. Kobe, starting with you. After seeing what happened last week and now this week, is Rahal Letterman Lanigan in bigger trouble than we thought?
I'd like to say that I'm surprised, but in reality, I'm actually not. If you've been watching our special coverage of Indy 500 practice all week, you might have heard me say that Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing has a history of not qualifying well for the Indianapolis 500, but they typically race better than how they qualify. But with 34 cars in it for the 33 car field, this is certainly a lot more pressure than that they were hoping for. Being in the last row shootout today is not ideal. It's a high pressure situation, and if you're Bobby Rahal, Lanigan, or Letterman, you have to be really, really concerned about today because there's a 75% chance that you can see one of their drivers going home here. And then when you look at all the changes that they made over the off season, bringing in someone from Formula One, bringing in someone who has over 30 years of experience working at Honda, and you make all of these personnel changes to try to get yourself on par with the top teams in the NTT IndyCar Series, and this is the result you get with your car struggling for speed. And if you look at the other race we had earlier this year at Texas Motor Speedway on the oval, Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing was slow there as well. It seems like their road and street cars program is pretty much hit or miss right now, but the oval program we saw at Texas Motor Speedway, they were in trouble. They were in trouble at the open test, and they're still in trouble today. So Jack Harvey, Christian Lundgaard, Graham Rahal, there's gonna be a lot of nerves on their time and stand because this is not an ideal situation to be in.
Now, Kobe, you hit the nail on the head there. This isn't about yesterday or this isn't about this week. This is something that I think, isn't much of a surprise, unfortunately, for Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing fans and for IndyCar fans that have been watching this team. And I think we got to remind people, this team is not, a small team necessarily in the IndyCar series. We don't consider them to be part of the big three of the Penske's, Ganassis, Andretti's. I guess McLaren is now, maybe we've got a big four with how well they've been running over the last couple of years. They're not at that level yet, but they're not a shoestring budget backmarker team. They're a team that's won this race before in very recent history, I might add, with Takuma Sato just a few years ago. They're a team that has been in contention here in very recent history. They're a team that, is capable of winning races and I would even argue competing for championships most years. And Graham Rahal is a seasoned veteran here. He's been coming to the Speedway for a decade and a half. This is mind-boggling. To see how much amount of resources that this team has brought in, like you were mentioning, Kobe, to try to improve their program and continue to take the fight to the top teams in this series and to find themselves here. I mean, if Stingray Rob had found just a little bit more pace on his last run yesterday, we'd be talking about there being 4 Rahal Letterman Lanigan racing cars at the Indianapolis 500 and 4 cars that aren't locked in after day 1 of qualifications. And Rahal would have swept out those 4 spots and be guaranteed to have a car go home. Their only car that is in the field Catherine Legg, and phenomenal job by Catherine Legg, by the way, being away from the Speedway for 10 years, coming back and guaranteeing herself a starting spot in next week's race. She was the 30th car, so it's not like she was at least up in the middle of the pack. All of their cars, it seems to be team-wide flaws that are bogging them down and putting them in danger here of sending one car home. And, if you're Ray Hall Letterman, if you're looking at this program here, you might think to yourself, if McLaren beat us, if Ganassi beat us, you know what? We can look ourselves in the mirror and say, you know what? Fair enough. They're the top teams right now. They nailed the setup the best, and we can take next week in practice to get our setups closer to where they are and compete with them on race day. But, you were out qualified by, again, no disrespect, but these teams don't have the budgets you have, much less the big teams in this series. I mean, Able Motorsports coming down here with a single car with RC Enerson. I got to apologize to RC Enerson. I thought it was a bump day lock, but he comes out here. He's safe. Juncos Hollinger Racing, there's not going to be a bump day drama with them back like there was in 2019 when they bumped out McLaren. I mean, those teams are in the field, yet Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan Racing has a very good chance, a 75% chance, like you guys mentioned, at sending one of their cars home. It's approaching Andretti 2011, Penske 95 levels of failure here if they end up having to send one of their cars home, because it's unbelievable that we're sitting here talking about this with a team-wide flaw and error here this massive, given the resources that they've put in, the fact that they're still not in the middle of the pack even, let alone competing for the Fast 12 or a spot up there. It's crazy that we're sitting here talking about this, but at the same time, I suppose it's not all that surprising.
It's just crazy to think. I especially will say a year ago, I would not say Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan will be in this situation. The way this year has been going, they've just been struggling. I would not anticipate 3 out of their 4. And if I was, I would think Catherine Legg being so long from the Speedway, but Jack Harvey, Christian Lundgaard, and Graham Rahal, this is an absolute disaster. Even if they get all 3 in, I still think that organization will be relieved they're not going home, but still probably feeling horrible that we don't have that great of a car. We don't seem that competitive. Granted, it's a long 500-mile race. The chances of winning, especially from the front row, very, very slim. Follow-up question for you all, starting with you, Ben. Ray Hall, Letterman, Lanigan, they get their entire back row, let's just say. So none of them are going home. But any of those drivers, Lundgaard, Harvey, or even Graham Rahal, could their time driving for Ray Hall, Letterman, Lanigan be coming to an end by the end of the season, or maybe earlier?
I don't know. I don't know if we could go that far based on just one bad Indianapolis 500 qualifications here. Like we were mentioning before we came on the show, and like you were just mentioning, Joe, as well. Christian Lundgaard, just had a shot to win last week on the road course configuration here at IMS. So the team I think has some positive things going for them right now with their drivers. Obviously, none of those things are being seen this weekend here. I don't see them giving up on Lundgaard. Just because, let's say he's the one that fails to qualify here. I don't think that would, cost him his job or anything. But I'll say this much, about Graham Rahal here. And by the way, I don't think Graham Rahal is going to be the one that gets bumped. I know Kobe predicted that in our group chat that he might be the one. I think they're going to give, all the setup that Catherine Legg had to get into the 500. I think they're going to prioritize Graham's car and get him in. But I think that, if you're Graham Rahal here and you look at this situation, there have been rumors swirling that he might be interested in going down to an Indy 500 only schedule in the not too distant future. You've got to remember that he hasn't always driven for his family team. He drove for Ganassi for a little while. Newman Haas is where he got his first win in his, I suppose, first IndyCar start. I know they've since merged the old Champ Car records, but that was a phenomenal win that really put him on the map there when he was just a teenager. So he hasn't always driven for his family's team. Maybe he would go look elsewhere. I think there would certainly be some changes that have to be made, because clearly the changes that have been made of this program, at least on the Indy 500 side, are not working. And, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. So you would have to change something up, I'd imagine, if you're the Ray Hall team, whether or not that's putting a different driver in the car as early as before the season's over. I think it's a little bit early to tell. But I think if this team does not get all their cars in, even if they do get all their cars in, like you mentioned, Joe, and they sweep the bottom row of the grid, that failure needs to be a wake-up call to everybody in this organization that something needs to turn around, something has to change, because this clearly isn't working for them.
For sure, and I totally agree with everything you said. And looking at the three drivers here, I'm going to start off with Jack Harvey. We've been talking about him a lot this season, how he needs to have a big year. And when they switched him over from the high V ride to the ride that's has several RLL associate sponsors, that was a big wake up call for him, since Christian Lundgaard has a lot more upside than Harvey does. Putting Lundgaard in that high V car would, give them a better chance of being more competitive, to be seen on TV and all of that, while Harvey had a big struggle last season with RLL, and the IMS road course is typically one of his better circuits on the IndyCar schedule. Last week had a good qualifying effort, looked like he was going to have a good result, but ended up having a really disappointing finish. And now this to be in the last row shootout. If Jack Harvey is the one who gets bumped in this year's Indy 500, I think he would be the RLL driver who'd be in the most trouble and not coming back next year. I'm not sure if that would mean a dismissal early in before we end the 2023 season. I don't think it may not cost him his job, but I think Harvey is certainly on the shortest leash of all the RLL drivers. Christian Lundgaard, I think he has plenty of potential. If he decides to leave, I think it would be because of grass is greener somewhere else, to try to go to a more competitive team to really allow him to truly show his talents. And Graham Rahal, Ben, you mentioned all the rumors that are swirling about him and his future. I know he made some comments over the weekend that kind of rubbed some people the wrong way, thinking that he's better than the car that he's given, that if you put him in a better car, that he'd be able to show what he can do. And it would certainly be interesting if he decides to leave his father's team for a more competitive ride elsewhere, if it opens up.
It's interesting. Right now, Jack Harvey, 21st in points. He has 53 points. So if he was to fail to qualify for this race, the drivers behind him, they'll easily leapfrog him in the points. Santino Ferrucci, Simon Pagenaud, Connor Daly, Devlin DeFrancesco, potentially Stingray Robb, assuming if Jack Harvey didn't get in, he'll be in the race. And Benjamin Peterson, 40 points behind. Graham Rahal, 15th in the points. I just find it very interesting if he would be the priority driver, because you have Christian Lundgaard, 9th in the points. Bigger points day. It would be huge loss for Graham Rahal to miss, because easily David Malukas, Marcus Armstrong, who is not in this race, but Ryan's VK, and even Augustin Canapino could overtake him. It's just really a tough situation for Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan. I think if Jack Harvey fails to qualify, considering how miserable last year went, how this year is not going good, I think he will be really on a tight leash. And if he doesn't deliver in the next few races after the Indy 500, I would not be surprised if Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan has another driver that could take that seat, maybe at one race weekend, giving that driver another shot. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Christian Lundgaard feels pretty safe. Graham Rahal, I highly doubt he'll be leaving anytime soon, but it's just going to be really interesting to see what's going to happen in this last row shootout. While we're all following down, of course, the poll is going to be decided as well, too. All the McLaren cars are in the Fast 12. You got Chip Ganassi racing up there. You got one Penske with Will Power. Ryan's VK with Ed Carpenter racing. Ed Carpenter just barely missed out. And AJ Foyt, the big surprise, both their cars, Benjamin Peterson, Santino Ferrucci, in the top 12. In fact, ahead of the Penske's. And, of course, Andretti Osborne did not make the Fast 12. Kobe, do you see AJ Foyt, the shock of them making the Fast 12? And could we see one or both of them in the front row?
And I just echo what everybody in the IndyCar paddock is saying. This is the effect of bringing in highly respected engineer Michael Cannon to the program. If you can get one engineer on your team, it's Michael Cannon. He's considered to be one of the best engineers that there is in IndyCar competition. and we saw him have quite a bit of success with Santino Ferrucci in the past, and as NBC has been alluding to all week, Michael Cannon isn't just Santino's engineer here. He isn't just Benjamin Peterson's engineer. He's basically like the head engineer of the team, working with both drivers, and you're starting to see him truly work his magic. Unfortunately, it hasn't really translated over to the road and the street courses yet, but for Indianapolis, it seems that the team has really hit a magical setup here. I was very, very surprised looking at practice for the Fast 12 today to see Benjamin Peterson set a lap at over 235 miles per hour and then 234 miles per hour for Santino Ferrucci. I'm not sure how qualifying is going to go for this team. I don't know if they're going to make it to the first row, but it would not surprise me to see at least one, either Ferrucci or Peterson, make the Firestone Fast Six to go for the pole. I'm very surprised to see how well AJ Foyt Racing has run, especially since they've out qualified some of all the big teams and drivers that you mentioned. So I have to give a lot of credit to that program for all of the hard work that they've been doing to try to become more competitive.
Yeah, I completely echo everything you said, Kobe. I think that this is a huge win for AJ Foyt and that program. I'll tell you what, I don't know that they can take the fight to the McLarens and the Ganassis for the pole, but I would not discount putting at least one of them into the Fast Six, like you were mentioning, Kobe. And I think that regardless of how this shapes out, to be on the first four rows of the Indy 500 grid for a team like AJ Foyt Racing that has had some struggles in recent years, I think you have to look at this as a moral victory for that team. And huge confidence and momentum boost going into the 500 next week. And I'll certainly say this much: I wouldn't put winning the race past either of those drivers for sure. Ferrucci has put in some very strong runs in his short IndyCar Series career already at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So the pole, I think the raw speed might be just a little bit out of reach. I think McLaren or Ganassi is probably going to be a battle between those two programs. But winning the Indianapolis 500. I think the speed that the Foyt cars have shown, they're definitely going to be up in the mix.
I got to agree. They'll be up in the mix. Santino seems to run really good at this track. If he runs a smart race, avoids the trouble, avoids mistakes, I feel that'll be one thing for this team to go mistake-free throughout the race when they're running up front, additional pressure compared to running mid-pack or in the back. They could be in contention for a win, and I think it'll be a huge story. And I think a lot of people would love to see if AJ Foyt, his team, was in victory lane at Indianapolis. But before we get to the race, we need to know, starting with you, Ben, who do you see taking pole for the Indy 500?
I feel like we're playing pick a winner, and I'm just going to pick, SVG for Supercars or Max Verstappen in Formula One. But I think, like I've said, until further notice, it's very hard to bet against Scott Dixon for the Indy 500 pole. So I think we'll leave it at that. But I think certainly don't put it past McLaren. Felix Rosenquist, Alexander Rossi, they both put down really fast times yesterday. I think they're going to be threats. But in terms of my pick, I can't bet against Scott Dixon. So I guess by default, I have to pick him.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see Dixon do it again. Maybe Dixon will go out there and beat his record that he set just last year. But looking at the practice for the Fast 12 today, it seemed like the Ganassi cars really showed all their stuff. McLaren doesn't look as strong as they did yesterday, but maybe they have a little bit left in the tank, just saving it for when it matters the most. But I'm gonna go with the Ganassi. I'm not gonna go with Dixon, but I'm gonna go with his teammate Alex Palou, who's entering this with plenty of momentum, and right now they're having practice for the last row shootout, and at the moment Christian Lundgaard he set a lap 230.8, while Jack Harvey 230.1, still waiting for Stingray Robb and Graham Rahal to turn their practice laps. So I wanted to give an update there.
So crazy to hear the last row shootout, and it's 230 miles per hour, but we know 234 and faster even this morning.
Yeah, can we just drive that point home for everybody real quick? 231 miles an hour flat would not have guaranteed you an Indy 500 starting spot yesterday. I mean, it's not just the speeds that we're seeing up at the top of the grid, and these guys creeping closer and closer to Arie Luyendyk's record of nearly 237, getting up into the 235s, 236 range, perhaps even for a single lap. I mean, the fact that the last row on the grid is well above 230 as well. I mean, it's unbelievable to see the speeds that we're seeing this year at Indianapolis.
Unbelievable speeds. For my pole winner, I think I'm going to go with Alex Palou after yesterday being the fastest Honda, the first one, because then everyone talked about it was a sea of Chevrolets. I think he's going to get it done. He has some momentum. He always runs good here so far since joining Chip Ganassi Racing. I think he could be the pole winner and potentially my pick a winner, but we'll find out, of course, the next Sunday, because next Sunday on the big race day for the Indy 500, we'll have a special pre-race show, noon Eastern. As soon as we're off the air, switch to NBC for the big race coverage of the Indianapolis 500. Link in the video description. Cody, Ben mentioned about SVG being the pick winner, pick for everybody, and unfortunately, nobody has gotten to pick a winner right because SVG has not touched victory lane.
Yeah, and as I said, Joe, SVG is human, and it seems like he's finally come back to earth. And on a positive note, it's finally wonderful to see some parity in supercars. I think it makes it exciting for everyone. No, it's not really fun to see one driver run away with the championship, and it seems like supercars has finally reached that sweet spot where there's a lot of parity, and we have multiple drivers who are gonna be in contention for the championship this year. And yes, yeah, and so that the disqualification at the beginning of the year it turns out is really hurting SVG a lot. And the Repco Supercars Championship just wrapped up its fourth race weekend of the year at Simmons Plains Raceway for the Tasmania Supersprint. For the first time this season, we didn't see Shane Van Gisbergen win a single race. In race one, SVG didn't have the pace, but managed to get a podium. Airbus Motorsport was too dominant as Will Brown took the win. In the second race, SVG crashed out after getting knocked off the track. His young Red Bull Ampol racing teammate Brock Feeney won this time around. In the third and final race of the weekend in Tassie, Airbus Motorsport kept his hot streak going with another win for Brown, who ended up on the podium in all three races, while his teammate Bertie Kostecki had two podiums. SVG managed to finish fourth in race three in a car his team only had a couple hours to repair. Still, the costly retirement in race two hurt him in the championship, dropping the multi-time Supercars champion down to fourth in the points. He's 172 points behind championship leader Kostecki, who leads Brown by 87 points, and Chaz Mosser in third, who has 166 points back. Meanwhile, Airbus is ahead of Red Bull Ampol Racing the team's championship by 276 points, and Supercars will return to action on June 17th and 18th at Hidden Valley Raceway for the Darwin Triple Crown.
And of course, the Supercars Series was the only race series that was part of the grid ranking since Formula One's race weekend was canceled due to flooding and heavy rains in Imola. Taking a look at week 8 of the grid ranking, one surprise change in the top 5, that has to be Sebastian Ogier got around Shane Gisbergen. How did that happen? Well, Shane Van Gisbergen, rough weekend. Sebastian Ogier got ahead because Shane Van Gisbergen's point standing total came down. Formula One, all the drivers in F1 had a 0.95 point reduction due to the canceled race weekend. Since the grid ranking is adjusted annually for each series schedule, when a race is canceled and not replaced by another date, a small points penalty has been placed. This was implemented after the 2021 grid ranking season. No change for Sergio Perez or Max Verstappen. However, looking at the further back in the full grid ranking, Fernando Alonso drops from 15th to 18th behind Pecco Bagnaia and Autonic. Will Brown from the Supercars Series, the biggest jump from 16th to 8th. First time he's in the top 10. Lewis Hamilton dropped 4 positions, and Leclerc remains last in the grid ranking. Next weekend, the biggest race weekend with the Monaco Grand Prix, then the Indianapolis 500, and the Coca-Cola 600 for the grid ranking. F1 Academy update. Another race weekend in the books in Barcelona, and we had 2 first-time winners and 1 repeat winner in Barcelona. Emily DeHouse and Lena Buller both took their first wins of the season in F1 Academy. The repeat winner, Amna Al-Khabasi, becomes the 3rd driver to win multiple races this season. Marta Garcia extended her points lead, though, with a 2nd place finish, a 3rd place, and another 3rd place finish. So 2 third place finishes and a 2nd place. Hamda Al-Khabasi is still 2nd in the points, but only earned 1 podium, 2nd place finish in race 3 to DNF and finished 5th in the 2nd race of this weekend. The F1 Academy now enters a long break to June 24th, 25th, and Zanderfoot. the halfway mark of the first season of F1 Academy. Full report on Friday show, The Women in Motorsports. Ben, as we get towards the end of this show, we got to decide who's going to win the All-Star Race.
That's right, Joe. Nobody, as you guys mentioned, got any of the Repco Supercar pick winners correct. With Will Brown and Brock Feeney taking the race wins, we now enter the same standing, or the standings look the same, I should say, as they looked on Wednesday. But we've got an opportunity to get on the board here with the All-Star Race. So I don't see a name going first here, so I'll just throw it over back to you, Joe. Go ahead and give us your pick for the All-Star Race. And still can't believe I'm saying it, North Wilkesboro Speedway. How about it? But who do you have winning tonight's race?
It is cool to say my pick for the race win at North Wilkesboro. Never thought that would occur again. I'm going to go with the same car number that won the last race here in 1996, the 24. Going with the 24, William Byron. He's going to put together a solid run, get the win, and hopefully, if we see more North Wilkesboro in the future, just seems pretty cool to have the last race up to 96, the 24 one, and then the first race back, the 24 one. William Byron's my pick.
And I'm gonna go with the driver who's had plenty of momentum this weekend at North Wilkesboro Speedway. He's in his interviews. He's been talking about how he's so excited to be here. Seems to be super thrilled about his car as well. Even his posts on Twitter suggest that how pumped he is about this. I'm gonna go with the driver starting on the opposite side of the pole sitter. I think Chris Buescher, RFK Racing, have a good piece. He was so dominant last night in his heat race, and I think Buescher can potentially get the job done tonight and get that $1 million. And before we throw it over to you, Ben, wanted to provide a quick final update on last row shootout practice. Kirsten Lundgaard still on top at 230.8 miles per hour. Then Graham Rahal, big improvement, jumps up to 230.6. And then Jack Harvey's in third there, which would take the final spot on the grid at 230.173 miles per hour. And then Stingray Robb right now, the one in trouble, 230.121 miles per hour.
Even there, it's incredibly close, and I wouldn't put it past Dale Coyne and Rick Ware's team to find a little bit of speed and bump one of the Rahal cars out. So certainly going to be something to watch there as we get in to the last row shootout later in the day. As for me, I tweeted it yesterday. I guess I'm going to stick with it now. I'm going to stick with Kyle Larson. Of course, he won the truck race yesterday. I know our Encore colleague Josh Birch is going to be thrilled about that on Monday's show, or tomorrow's show, I guess I should say. But I think Larson, looked very strong in the truck race yesterday. I know this is a very different car and very different setup and situation, but I think that momentum is going to serve him well, and he'll find a way to go into victory lane and complete the weekend sweep here at North Wilkesboro.
Seems very likely, especially with that truck series win. Try to go out there, have a good race. It's going to be really interesting. Of course, we'll recap the North Wilkesboro All-Star Race on Grid Encore tomorrow. And, of course, a lot of racing to cover with the truck series. I believe Joshua will be on the air as well, too, with some British touring cars. A lot of racing overall. And, of course, keep us on the air by investing in us through Patreon, where you get your name on the board. If we can hit $500 a month, we'll be at the track more frequent. We're going to have some busy on-track coverage for the Portland race weekends. We got the Xfinity Series coming in a couple of weeks, and then Formula E later in the year. Buy me a coffee. That is where you set the amount. You could do a one-time contribution or buy multiple cups of coffee. Even buy a cup of coffee for your favorite on-air talent here at the Grid Network. And follow us on social media. GridRanking.com. All the latest articles from our writing staff there. Opportunities on LinkedIn, and of course Grid Ranking on Twitter for the newest Grid Ranking and Grid Endurance Performance Index, which will come out on Wednesday on Grid Tonight with Kobe Lambeth, Matt White, and Joshua Birch. And then Friday, Women in Motorsports. Dan and I will recap the F1 Academy race weekend. We'll talk about a little bit about Haley Deegan's eventful day at North Wilkesboro and much more leading up to Saturday, where we'll preview Formula One and NASCAR. Then Sunday morning, before the 107th run of the Indianapolis 500, our special Grid Life pre-race show for the Indy 500. For Ben Schneider, Kobe Lambert from the Podium Finish, I'm Joe San Diego. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time, and enjoy the races. Thank you for watching us right here on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and check out some of our other videos, including Life on the Grid, where we interview folks from the motorsports industry. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.